yeah, and then I've lived in different parts of the world, partly because I can, and partly because I'm very interested in. I'm afflicted with being interested in everything, Tane. You know that.
Same. Yeah.
And so you try and figure out how things work, and I feel like I've found my niche now in my sort of, I guess, middle years, if you will, um, where I'm most effective and most productive.
You picked up a law degree along the way,
That was a waste of time.
probably,
Well,
but I am,
I was 16, and when you're 16, you kind of know that things are coming, i.e., you've
yeah,
got to figure out what to do with your life when you leave school, and so I was reading John Grisham books. You know, John Grisham, he's made
yeah, of
some, they've
course.
made
Yeah.
movies out of his. He's a great storyteller. And so I got stuck into Grisham books, and I think I read them all. And I was like, "This is it. I want to be a lawyer." So
Mm.
I took on studying by correspondence because I
Fantastic.
couldn't afford to go to university, law, and it didn't. It's a waste of time.
You don't do anything with it today, but it certainly taught you how to read deeply of the kind of detailed literature, finance, prospectus, like all the various things that you do as an investor must have benefited from that level of just granularity. And, Bill Bonner got a law degree as well, and he never did anything with it either. Another legendary newsletter guy. Um, but fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you learn from whatever you do, right? I mean, looking back on it now, I think one of the biggest benefits for me was because I was broke and the son of broke parents, so like I had to pay for everything and try and pay for my life as well as studying at nights and paying for that and yada yada.
It's a
Anyway, the
great
point was
motivation
that, well,
being being
you
broke.
know, any degree you've got a certain volume of information you've got to get through, but law is actually quite bad in that respect. Like there's a shitload of fucking just
Right.
tons and tons of stuff you got to read. And I was like, I looked at this stuff. I'm like, I have not got the time. I cannot like fathom how I'm going to get through all of this material. I look at these. This is back in the day as I get packs of books shipped to me, You'd like read through them and you'd have to write your notes and you'd have to send them in by mail. And, there wasn't, the internet hadn't kind of come along to the degree that it is today. Anyway, what I got, where was I? I was in Sydney and I was working a job there, and someone mentioned something to me around touch typing, trying to learn to type, and I was like, oh, okay. So I went, I'm like, and so I got a keyboard to learn how to touch type. I didn't even have a computer, right? I thought, oh, this will be a skill. Maybe I can. Anyway, so when I went to the library, I got this book on touch typing, and there's another book there. I picked it up, and it was on speed reading. And so the two things basically were actually super valuable. I type a lot today, and I touch type, and I'm very fast. But the other thing, and the biggest value, one of the biggest values is speed read. So I can read
Yeah.
really, really quickly. You don't actually
Yeah.
need to read any of the
That's right.
and the but you like
Yeah.
so like if there's a podcast that I want to see, I'll just like get it transcribed and then I'll just read it and I can read it in like
Much
very, very
faster.
quickly. So I can consume a lot of information
That's
by speed
valuable.
reading. And I wouldn't have done that if I hadn't gone down the path of being so stupid as to wanting to go and try and study law as well as working full time. So there you go.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And thoughts on how this all plays out. I don't mean how the situation in the world plays out, but specifically, I know you fancy Latin America to a degree. You're in New Zealand. It's your main digs. Where else? What? Either individual countries or like places to sort of ride out whatever shit show we're about to witness, and it's going to be fascinating. Let's just own up to the fact it's a wonderful time to be alive. This is a tremendous moment in history that things are so upside down, and that if you can think through what's happening, at least to a degree, right? you get to be in the game and sort of play the cards that are being dealt, which is just a tremendous. I mean, in terms of like interesting times, right? This might be the peak. Certainly for our culture, certainly for Western culture. Europe is a scratch, right? I don't know that I don't see any place you can ride out in Europe. Spain is super nice, but you can't get more than $1,000 out of an ATM or whatever it is, like whatever silly law they passed. And so, like all across the board, the so-called name brand countries are really in a fix. Where do you like it if things really get like ugly,
Yeah,
like
so
unpleasant?
it's look, the answer to that is quite nuanced, and it's going to depend on particular people's own um, desires and skill sets.
Yep.
You can throw me into most any country, and I'm quite comfortable. I've lived in multiple. I've traveled to tons, and so my view of the world is going to be quite different to other people, and I think that's people forget that, right? So,
Yes.
and I've had people come to me and they've lived in one place all their lives and they're like, oh, that's it, I'm going somewhere. And they're like, where do I go? And I'm like, I can't tell you where to go because like I know what would happen. They'll be like 2 weeks into some place and then
Yeah.
foreign language and like it's much more difficult and they'll just freak out and it won't work. So the answer to that is very much dependent on your own mental psychology, the way you view the world and the way that you can actually navigate things. That being said, I've always been, to some degree, it's a similar way to the way that I manage my portfolio and client portfolio, which is to say that I look for where the risk is least. And so in financially, that's places that don't have the same sort of debt levels domestically, which means that they don't have the same domestic conflict, likely domestic conflict. Um, Often that's places that have been messed up. So I mean, Argentina is kind of a good example. Like there's no debt in the system, no domestic debt at an individual level because people didn't borrow money. Why would you borrow money when interest rates, well, inflation is running 200%.
Yeah.
Okay. Like so no one's going to lend you money because
They borrow
the
it. Yep.
cost of the lend is going to exceed 200%. Now, why is that good? Because there's no leverage in the system.
Yeah.
Now that interest rates and the currency has been stabilized and inflation is running about 20% a year, which is what, like 2% a month?
Mhm.
I mean, that's from what was 25% a month. So now credit's coming into the system, which is kind of good in some ways, but but like your underlying structure to that, just in terms of debt, is vastly different. So a credit bust in Argentina won't have like interest rates blowing up won't have any effect to the average man, which means that you don't suddenly have people rioting on the streets. That's a significant problem in the Western developed markets. Like
Yeah.
interest rates run 5, 6, 10%, and you'll have significant issues. Okay. So those risks are much more mitigated. So I like those. The other concept and that I think is worth looking at are countries which are somewhat dysfunctional at a bureaucratic level. And I say that because of the COVID scam that we had and the way to navigate that. One of the worst setups was actually a very highly functioning bureaucracy,
Yep. Yeah.
you know, um, like Singapore, you know,
Yeah.
because it's just
Everybody's obedient and
very efficient
yeah,
in
right.
terms of making sure that what they say happens. Now,
Yeah.
you contrast that to say Mexico, which we were talking about before we hit record. There is an element of freedom that comes with the fact that the bureaucracy is inefficient and dysfunctional, and you can, especially, and this comes back to what I said right at the start, have capital. If you have capital, you have the ability, the optionality to do these, to make decisions. So if you have capital and you're in a place, and this was true in 2020 and 2021, um, you were in a place like Mexico, $50 here, $100 there, $200 there, and you live your life and you do whatever you please.
Yep.
That's quite different to if you were in, say, Singapore or in Hong Kong or in New York City or any of these other places. So there's those elements that are worthy of considering. And as we go through this breakdown of Western social, political, economic systems, the ramifications of that will be felt less in countries that don't have the same structural underpinning. So I like those. I mean, you could even make an argument. I know that they are now being surrounded by US warships, but Venezuela, which I spent a little
Yeah.
bit of time having a look at. I'm not saying you
Did you
should go
enjoy
and
it?
move to Venezuela. I'm pointing out that
Yes.
they've been through so much shitfuckery and don't come out with like, oh, you're a supporter of Maduro or whatever. Like that's not the point. So, but there are the risks that are existing and the likely ramifications for those things coming will not be felt in certain countries. That's what you got to look at. So it's not like looking at something going, this is nicer than that, right? Anybody, any fucking moron could look at, say, Caracas and go, oh, Miami's nicer than Caracas. Yeah, okay, fine.
Yeah.
That's not the point.
Yeah.
What is the path of trajectory? And as a consequence of something like a credit collapse, a stock market collapse, what are the ramifications for individuals in those? I can tell you now that Caracas probably wouldn't make any goddamn
They
difference.
wouldn't even
They,
know. Yeah,
they
right.
wouldn't even know.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, Miami or these other places can be a little bit different. So those are things I think to consider as opposed to just giving people to, telling them where to go. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
No, that's good thought process. I spoke to Nick Hudson earlier, and he was opining about the pleasant living in Cape Town. Like what a lovely town it is. And so,
Mm,
the point when I was talking to him was no, these pockets of tranquility, sanity, functionality do exist and will continue to exist. And a lot of that comes down to community. You and I are part of a sort of global network of, here I'm talking about the Mavericks Project that came out of some of the chaos of the early 2020s. And happily so. That's been a wildly successful project. We have an event coming up in Dallas. You guys can see the link to that below this video. For those who would be interested in like-minded, real ass-kicking, successful people who are actually doing something about sort of the dark clouds that we all see on the horizon. And when you and I first spoke, I was in Mexico. I was 21 for the birth of my son, and our experience there was exactly that, right? You could absolutely do anything you wanted to in Mexico. There was essentially no lockdown for us, and if you had to, if you went to, I'm trying to think of any place where like masks, where I actually had to mask up or even pretend to go along with anything. I mean, you just couldn't find it, right? And so there will be places, and it's also very important to have a community of people, right, who also get you, who also get sort
mhm.
of who have thought deeper than just what's on mainstream television news and
Yeah.
about what's taking place in the world. And that has been the great benefit of the Mavericks Project to me, and I know to a lot of people, has been, hey, thank God, there's other people out here who have thought these things through, and we're not going to obey on somebody else's terms. And there's really something to that. So I'm looking forward to seeing you again in Dallas. It's been just a fantastic ride
Likewise.
so far. Yeah, there's just great stuff coming out of that. So
Well,
again,
there's a lot to cover, and
yeah,
so, if you're listening to this and the things that we talk about resonate with you, you know, I'm reminded of there's a statistic that Andrew mentioned to me the day before yesterday, which is quite astounding. So there was a survey done on social media as to content created, how it gets repurposed, and who reads it, and so on and so forth. The numbers were basically this: 1%, it was 1, 9, 90. 1% of people create content, 9% promote, augment, argue about it, and 90% read it.
there you go.
Why that's important is because it's representative of society. It is how these elites get to do whatever the fuck they want because they're the 1%. And they realize most people will just argue about it, but they won't do anything about it. Um, the design of Mavericks was that we are definitely the 1%. We are people who will do something about what is happening. We will take action. And that's who this is for. And so we've had 4 events since we
5 now.
launched it. 5.
5 with Grand
Yeah, that's
Cayman, I
true.
think. Yep.
Dubai. Yep, 5.
Yep.
So this will be the 6th one.
And real solutions. What's been astonishing is, like, don't forget, if you're watching this, like, don't forget, with all the chaos, and obviously you can focus on doom and gloom, but look at the opportunities that are available for individuals right now who have capital, who have imagination, who have backbone, right? Who have the ability and the desire to do something about the situation. That group has carved out just an astonishing number of, whether it's, locations. We have a buddy who has a working farm in Venezuela now. I won't say where, but people taking all kinds of action, like real action, to I don't want to say like counteract what's taking place, because again, like, nobody knows exactly how everything's going to fall out, but the game right now is optionality. And wherever you are, you're going to need food, you're going to need water, you're going to want to preserve your capital through whatever madness is coming. And so a lot of it is just like not doing the obvious thing wrong. Like you said at the start of this podcast, like, obviously, if all of your capital is in, Mag 7 stocks, right? Obviously, you're taking a bit of a risk that whole thing is going to continue. And there's no reason to do that. There's so much optionality, but you do have to go grab it. You do have to go find it. And that's a lot of what we do in these Mavericks gatherings. It's the best time you can have with your clothes on. It really is just a fabulous time. I'm sure Dallas is going to be great. I love that city. So if you're
yeah, we're
interested
gonna have
in
a lot
that,
of fun. Also go and
it's
shoot
going to be
some
great.
guns and do things like
Yeah,
that
we're going to go
too.
shoot guns. Fantastic. Very Texan thing to do. Why not? Well, Chris's newsletter is the very best newsletter. This is coming from a guy. I'm now 10 years in the business. I work for the biggest publisher in the world in newsletter space. We're wildly successful, which doesn't mean we had great content all the time. But Chris's newsletter is, in my opinion, the very best newsletter that's out there. Everybody should have a subscription to Capitalist Exploits Insider. That link is below the video. Chris, anything else you want to wrap up with?
I think we covered everything.
We've
that I
covered
can
what we
think of.
could.
Covered what we could. We
Fantastic.
could
Well,
keep talking for hours, but probably
yeah, easily.
best we put a
Easily.
pin
Well,
in
I,
it.
I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise and some part of your journey. And obviously, I look forward to seeing you soon. We'll talk, I'm sure, sometime in between.
Absolutely.
Thanks very
Thanks.
much. All right, mate. Take care. All the best. Mavericks Project is a private community focused on powerful connections, trusted information, and time-tested solutions to create and preserve wealth during our epoch of extreme change. The Mavericks Project was born out of the social, economic, and geopolitical schism that kicked off in 2020. A small band of contrarian misfits spent the lockdown years observing problems, analyzing the implications, and plotting solutions. Now, several times a year, we Mavericks get together in fun and fascinating locations to talk about solutions to the social dangers to your family's safety and how to avoid them, the increasing state surveillance and how to negate it, the rapidly declining U.S. empire and how we want to position for what's coming next, the risks to your family's generational wealth and how to protect it. If you think you have what it takes to be a Maverick, this is your chance to come make new and better friends with some of the most accomplished people you will ever meet. Join us from November 4th to 7th in Dallas, Texas for 3 unforgettable days of action, discussion, and answers. The link for the event, along with all the details, is below this video.